Welcome to today's licensing subcommittee meeting. We've had a change of membership of the licensing panel. Councillor Peace couldn't make it today, so Councillor Mosdell has kindly stepped in to take his place. If I could just give you the fire precautions, if we hear a fire alarm or whatever, please go out of the building, down the stairs, and so out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the building. Yeah, whatever. Okay, right. The first item are the minutes for the last meeting. Has anybody got any comments about those? No. Okay. The next item is declarations of interest. I invite members to. This it. Did it. There we go. Next item is a declaration of interest. I'll invite any members to declare any interest they might have on matters on the agenda. Okay, we'll go on. Any urgent business you need to consider? No, good. The next item is the report from the Director of Neighbourhoods about the application for a premises licence for Island Life Craft Ale House, Clarence Road, East Cowes, pages 9 to 58. I don't propose to read through them here. I'm assuming that you all have. There we go. The application was submitted by Mr. Glenn.
Chairman, Shane will. If you just read the introduction, and then Shane will highlight the application and contents of the report for the committee and members present.
Okay, I'll carry on. The application for premises licence submitted to the licensing authority, Glenn Johnson, for Island Life Craft House, Ale House, East Cowes. Right. Shane.
Thank you. Yeah, as you've said, the application is for a premises licence. It was submitted on the 19th of June this year by Mr. Glenn Johnson. Island Life Craft Ale House is located at 1A Clarence Road, East Cowes, Isle of Wight, PO 326 EP. As part of the 28-day consultation exercise, the applicant has agreed to conditions with environmental health and police authorities. These conditions would look to promote and uphold the 4 licensing objectives, and they can be found at Appendix 2 and pages 47 to 49 of the report. Mr. Johnson, within his application for the premises licence, also documented measures that he is committed to undertake should the licence be deemed granted, and these will look to further promote and uphold the objectives. These can be found within the application form's operating schedule at Appendix 1, page 17 to 19. Should the subcommittee determine to grant the licence in whatever form, these measures will be converted into enforceable conditions, and they will form part of the licence if it is granted. During the 28-day consultation period, one valid representation remains outstanding. To summarise, concerns raised state that the granting of the premises licence as per application and agreed conditions between the applicant, environmental health and police will be likely to have an adverse impact upon nearby residents and businesses with regards to noise disturbance from licensable activities provided at the premises. Details which sort of include this representation can be found at Appendix 1, pages 57 and 58 of the report.
Badger, could I just ask you to repeat the comments, please? You just mentioned.
Yeah, well, they're agreed conditions, and they look to uphold the objective for the prevention of crime and disorder in the first instance, because the police are the leading authority for that objective. Other conditions have also been agreed with environmental health and the applicant, which will look to uphold the objective for the prevention of public nuisance. And they're both found on within the report, as I say, pages 47 to 49. The options open to the subcommittee today, following the presentation of information from all interested parties, will be to grant the proposed variation as requested by the applicant, to grant the proposed variation as requested, but with the additional conditions and any other conditions that the subcommittee may feel are appropriate or proportionate to promote the licensing objectives. The third option for the subcommittee would be to reject the proposed application. It should also be noted, though, that by those making representations, the Licensing Act contains provisions where an interested party can apply for review of the licence at any time following the decision made by the committee.
That's what you think. Has anyone else got any comments to add? No?
Morning. Hello. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I moved to East Cowes 6 years ago from Southampton. Southampton's got quite a large craft ale presence. I think there's a misconception what craft ale is. It's quite easy to say, oh, it's just another pub. Most craft ale houses, mine included, don't sell the basic beer that you would get in a pub. There's no Stella, there's no vodka and red shots. It's not about that. Someone once described craft ale to me like cheese, and that is your area makes cheese and you're proud of that cheese. And beer's the same. And when I opened up my brewery 2 years ago now, I've been brewing for about 10 years on and off. But when COVID hit, obviously I decided to take a more serious look at it. And so I've opened my own brewery and I've been practicing ever since. And so the best way I think for a business to succeed when it comes to craft beer is to have an outlet. I have a lot of time for East Cowes actually from Southampton. It's a lovely place to live. And I thought this would be a good idea. It's not something that exists in East Cowes. Cowes seems to take the lion's share of interesting places to visit, to drink, to eat. And so that's where this was born out of. I used to run a pub 8 years ago. I didn't like it, which is ironic probably to the people sat around this table. And that's the distinction, I think, which is interesting about pubs to craft ale. And that is, craft ale's interesting. I always describe it as a bit like a sweet shop. You go in, there's small amounts of different beer, and when they run out, they're gone pretty much forever. Craft beer around the country's exploded. There's lots of little breweries present, and they all make small batches. It's more expensive than pubs. You tend to have a certain clientele that use craft ale houses because, again, there's not copious amounts of lager and spirits. And so, in general, craft ale houses tend to be more calm than a pub. You don't tend to have live music. You tend to have background music. And it tends to be a place where people just meet. Now, if I can just move on, I understand. I met Mike outside. We just had a quick chat before we come in. I understand the concerns about noise. I live right near the Victoria Tavern. So I understand what it is to run a pub. And I understand what it is to live outside a pub. I can mitigate noise. I spoke to Danny, come to site. There are materials you can use to mitigate noise within an establishment like this. They dampen noise up to 50 decibels. To you and me, that's how we're talking now, probably in general with a louder, more people talking. That's television noise. So the equivalent to, say, a background radio or a bit of background music. And it will mute that out. What it won't mute is shouting and loud music. Well, neither one of those two are what I plan to have in the alehouse, to be honest. Shouting tends to come from as the night goes on and people drink, and the music's loud, so everyone shouts at each other. You've probably all been in pubs and experienced that. Again, the only music I plan to have there is background music, and if there was any live music, it would probably be more like a acoustic guitarist coming to play. So there's not like bands and things like that. So I think the soundproofing will mitigate pretty much all the noise from within the premises themselves. I don't plan to have a rowdy premises. That's not what I want. I'm aware that the 2 social clubs nearby sell cheap alcohol and play sport. And again, these things, this is why I don't run a pub. It's not what I've ever been interested in doing. I'm interested in beer. I'm interested in people experiencing my beer. And I'm interested in people experiencing beer from around the country. It's a tough profession at the moment. And as you know, probably more closing than opening. So as for inside, I would hope that with staff training and with the measures of insulating the noise, that will allay any concerns Mike might have. As for outside, again, I understand the fact that when people are drinking, they leave the premises. I put in the application about cordoning off a small cordon outside for smokers. That was actually to help with the noise. If you don't have that small cordon, what will happen is if people leave the premises, they can wander around. It's very hard to control anyone who's maybe being loud outside unless you can get to them. And so the small cordon was based on the fact that if someone steps outside, bear in mind there's no pavement license, there's also no alcohol allowed outside, that we can get to them quickly. But I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to be rude. There is a difference between probably the clientele that use a craft ale house and a clientele that would use a normal pub. And that's because people that use craft ale houses are there for the beer. They meet people there, but what they're really there for is to sample things that within a week's time won't exist anymore. And so that, to a certain extent, mitigates the sort of clientele you're going to get. And I would like to think that those sort of clientele are different. And for someone who's drank in Southampton a lot around craft ale houses, that tends to be the case. I spoke to the licensing police officer in Southampton actually yesterday. He phoned me and we had a chat about this. Unfortunately, there's no statistics for problems from craft ale houses in Southampton. He did ask to say that it should be recognised that the police aren't present here. And there's a reason for that, because they understand pretense of craft ale houses and what they bring to the table, and that they don't tend to have issues with craft beer. Also, my application, I have applied until 11 o'clock. It's a leap of faith, of trust, but I don't actually plan to open that late. But I wanted the option that if there's an evening where it's going quite well, that you can stay open. And so it was never my intention to go to 11, certainly not in the week. It is, I can't 100% say there won't be some sort of presence of noise when people leave. I would like to think it would be instantaneous. I would like to think it would just be talking as people leave the premises. And then they will go home. For someone who commutes a lot from Southampton, you know, there are people that leave the boat that walk down Clarence Road that are noisy. I mean, I don't know how we can 100% mitigate noise. What we can do is make sure that when people leave, they are instructed to leave quietly. And that hopefully, because of the nature of the beast, that those people will be a different sort of clientele that will respect the area. But I do understand why Mike's here. I do understand that there's a concern. I do understand that there are children that live above the craft ale house, and I have a 5-year-old myself, and he lives opposite a pub. So I do understand, and that sometimes there can be flashpoints and sometimes there can be issues. I'm not going to stand here and say, or sit here and say there's not going to be that. All I can say is I hope by meeting me, you can see that I'm 47 years old. I'm not opening this because I want a rowdy establishment. I'm opening this because of my love of beer, my love of brewing beer. And I was hoping that the people of East Cowes could experience that. And I hope for the Isle of Wight in general. I mean, this is not just about East Cowes. This is about a project. So this is the first, hopefully, of many. You're probably going to see me again if I open up around the island. But the plan is to have satellite ale houses around the island and a brewery set up in Newport. That's my plan. And it starts with this one in East Cowes. And so the craft beer market's not on the Isle of Wight at the moment, not to a certain extent. And so I'd like to introduce that. And I think it brings people to the island. People travel to taste different beer. And I think it would be beneficial around to everyone. I hope that goes some way into explaining who I am and what I'm doing.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That was very clear. Yeah, thank you very much. That's good. Mr. Macmillan, would you like to present? Is it your daughter you're speaking for?
Morning all. Dan Power on behalf of the Environmental Health Department. The Environmental Health Department were primarily concerned with matters related to noise control in respect to the proposed use. So I attended the premises and met with Mr. Johnson on the 11th of July, and it included an inspection of the premises at the time. So you'll find via Appendix 2, it confirms the agreed conditions between the applicant and Environmental Health. And note that each of the proposed conditions, which have been provisionally agreed anyhow, include some justification. So this is necessary really in this instance, especially because the hours, the exception of a 30-minute period on a Saturday, fall within the hours of deregulation as provided by what's called the disapplication of live and recorded music between 8 AM and 2300 hours. And that came about because of the Live Music Act. So to an extent, there was a presumption in favour of trying to increase such activity in these premises. So that's why it really included some justification here, because typically during these times, you'd find that conditions wouldn't be applied and they may not even be enforceable. So that hence why there was quite, some justification and some discussion between myself and Mr. Johnson throughout. So turning to the conditions, condition 1 requires that no licensable activity is authorised at all until a scheme of sound insulation works have been submitted and agreed by the licensing authority. And that ultimately that will include environmental health's intervention. So it seeks to cover matters including, but not limited to, noise transference via walls and ceilings. It's especially that impact noise as people come and go from the premises. Condition 2 seeks to abate the likelihood of patrons gathering on the outside parts, as Mr. Johnson has described, other than to smoke. So the condition really intends to ensure that that presence of patrons outside is fleeting at best. And it's not a case of prolonged periods of time where people are stood outside with alcohol, making use of that site as an additional area to congregate. And condition 3 requires prominent, clear and legible notices to be displayed. Again, the aim here really is to ensure that dispersal of patrons on the cessation of licensable activity at the end of the night is phased, and it occurs whilst trying to mitigate disturbance to neighbouring residents. So on reviewing the representation received via Appendix 6, I do appreciate the concerns that have been raised, and I do consider them more than justified. However, given the intended hours of trade, which is primarily up to 11 PM, potentially, the conditions proposed with the Environmental Health Department and the limited music offer, which I understand is likely to be background in nature and ancillary to the primary objective, which is the consumption of alcohol. From an environmental health perspective, I do not consider the application as likely to undermine the public nuisance objective, but I do appreciate the reason for the initial representation. I also want to point out part 2.18 of the revised guidance that's issued under the Licensing Act. It's worth noting that there are more suitable provisions in other pieces of legislation, namely by way of the statutory nuisance regime, which adequately protects those living in the area of the premises in the event of a complaint of disturbance. So with this in mind, were noise disturbance alleged, neighbouring residents retain the capacity to request the department to investigate here via the Environmental Protection Act. So in addition to discussion around the hours of trade, the additional provisions that are available in other pieces of legislation, also, and the proposed conditions, we also have to consider what's the term convention. And that typically is, what is the general use of the area? Now, on this occasion, I consider it reasonable to expect a degree of noise associated with commercial activity within an area of mixed commercial residential use, particularly during the hours applied. So at this point, I thank you for your time and I invite any questions.
I have one, and it comes down to smokers. Being an ex-smoker myself, I think mine is that, yes, I understand that people, when they have a drink, would like a cigarette. But this craft ale doesn't, I know this craft ale shop in Sandown, and when I've gone past, I've never seen great boards of smokers outside. But actually, when I go past a pub, there are more, as more people drink more, they have a tendency to smoke more. So I know we can mitigate against smokers and stuff like that. But that area, isn't there flats and things like that along there? So there's nothing to stop actual residents going out as couples and smoking out in that street anyway, isn't there?
Potentially. That could
Potentially.
occur.
So we're saying that, you know, there could be, to me, we've got this outside, but I can't see it's going to be a huge problem compared to having an actual pub on that street. Is that right?
I agree. And in addition to that, that's why we thought to add the additional condition about ensuring that those drinks do not leave the premises. So I think the condition plus the small area outside makes it an awful lot easier to manage if that were to occur.
Thanks. Lights are on. Glasses on. Basically, I'm here to represent my daughter who owns the property next door to the proposed ale, not pub, but gathering place. I think I should just let you know for a start, I couldn't find the application online. I don't know if this is just common to me. I meant to have a fairly good with the old computer, but I literally could not find this application online going through the normal channels just for information. So I don't know how many people sort of missed it, but first point I'd like to make. I think my daughter's and my concerns really regarding this application are firstly the noise penetrating the, I have to read it a little bit, the wall between the proposed ale house and the accommodation part of her property. The adjoining wall there actually butts onto the entrance hall and a small flight of stairs going up to the kitchen. So noise would actually penetrate straight into the sort of accommodation area of her property there. I think that was our sort of main concern there. Her property needed considerable renovation work to restore this listed building to its original status as an important part of the East Cowes conservation area. Restrictions by the listed planning department meant that she could not replace the rather ugly modern 60s windows with double glazed sash windows replicating the originals. They had to be single glazed and had to be custom made. The consequence of that basically is that, of course, you don't get the sound insulation that you would have done had we been allowed to put double glazing in there. But it also sort of concerns really that, I know you talked a lot about the smokers and the controls over them, but any smokers outside there are likely to go up and enter through the windows. I mean, you can't really prevent it, I don't think. It's, as you know, there's sort of, you know, children and what have you that sort of in the bedrooms above. Anyway, I was pleased to see that the applicant sent the following response, and we did discuss this recently outside a little bit. Dear concerned residents, firstly, we'd like to express our gratitude for taking the time to voice your concerns regarding the opening of our craft ale house. We understand that noise disturbances can be a significant inconvenience and believe it is essential to address these issues emphatically and robustly. We have carefully considered the objection raised and are confident that we can implement measures to mitigate any potential noise disturbances. As part of our commitment to being good neighbours, we are prepared to take the following steps. Noise reduction materials. We're willing to invest in installing noise reduction materials within the premises to ensure that any noise generated by patrons is minimised and contained within the building. This is in response to the application. I've just taken this out from his application. Rich wooden fixtures, exposed brick walls will create a cosy, inviting atmosphere. And I think concern here really is that as a listed building in that sort of area, you know, how do you go about putting sound insulation on a building that's listed and presumably has sort of all sorts of rules and regulations about what you can and can't do to an interior wall like that? I mean, you know, we sort of renovated the inside under sort of the obligation of the planners. And I understand quite clearly that there's enormous restrictions on what you can and can't do to a listed building. So I think there could be sort of conflict a little bit here between the listed building consents, installing noise reduction materials within the premises, and really, how do you propose to agree that any proposed installation is sufficient not to create a disturbance into the neighbours? I know you have sort of covered this, but again, who decides whether the installation is going to be sufficient to stop the noise going through? Your answer, I know, but how is this going to sort of integrate really with the planners and other organisations that want to sort of preserve the sort of whole heritage area? So our main concerns really. And as I said, I had hoped that we'd have a meeting with Mr. Johnson and my daughter myself down at the premises, but that unfortunately never came to be. I think there was explain the reasons for it, but I think I've added this on too. I think our concerns really for this particular area is the gradual change from daytime activity of normal shopping, which that area was. I mean, it's a sort of beautiful little part of East Cowes. And more we're sort of slipping into an area where we're going to have sort of evening and nighttime activities in a designated heritage and conservative area. And I'm just not sure whether there's a, you know, this is the way that the council in that sort of, in the East Cowes Council want that to go. I mean, there's sort of all sorts of areas where you could have ale houses and pubs and everything else. Does this particular sort of block of Queen Victoria's residential area for her offices with shops below? I mean, is this the sort of direction they want to go in? I'm not sure.
Chairman, can I assist on one point, if I can? Thank you. And it's just to confirm a point that has been made by the objectors, which is that the grant or otherwise of the license in this case, and it's only really relevant on the grant, so I should say on the grant of an application. So if this committee were minded to grant this application, it wouldn't relieve the applicant of their responsibility and indeed legal obligation to go and secure planning permission. And we often see in these cases that there is an overlap between the planning regime and the licensing regime, and as you will know on this committee, they are separate statutory regimes. And so what we're here to determine today is the licensing element of that, and then it'll be for the applicants to go away and satisfy themselves that they have the necessary planning things in place. And if there is later an issue between those, then they can come back and vary, or indeed have a look at the noise management plan to try and achieve a variation.
Thank you. And so just to confirm, we're not seeking to eliminate noise activity together. We appreciate there may be a degree of noise associated with commercial trade, but ultimately the idea is to ensure that the levels of noise do not have the effect of materially impeding someone's use of their home. There are provisions in terms of maximum noise levels that looked at, but ultimately the condition is set that the premises would not be able to trade until sound insulation has been achieved. And as has been mentioned, there are separate regulatory functions in terms of determining that. But ultimately, trade will not be able to occur in the interim, or licensable trade would not be able to occur in the interim.
Houses actually needs anything happening, because there's, you know, it needs an injection of life put back into it. You know, I still think putting waitrose in somewhere there's actually been really detrimental to the house. So I know it's fine to say that you'd like daytime premises, but I would have thought at the moment any type of premise would actually put some life back in to East Cowes. I know you say about noise and stuff like that. My question is, you're saying that in my head, the ale house is here, and then there is an entrance into your daughter's property, and then you're saying there's a staircase and a kitchen. So the actual internal walls is not going straight onto a lounge or a kitchen, a lounge and a bedroom. Is that right? So the actual stairs going up, there is a gap.
The wall that the party wall between the two is directly alongside the entrance hall and the stairs going up. And the stairs, it stops on the back room, so the noise would be literally outside of the kitchen itself.
I know, because my daughter lives in a semi-detached house, and I quite often when I go round and I'm in her entrance halls, I can hear people in next door because it's a semi-detached, but it doesn't affect her at night because actually her bedrooms aren't facing it. Do you see what I mean? I think it makes a difference if there's a bedroom attached to straight to that wall. Does it make sense? Yeah.
Typically with any sort of noise assessment, so that could be via the World Health Organization's community noise impact or specific British standard regulations. They cover the main living areas. So you're looking at the living room and the bedroom is taking precedence. Kitchens and bathrooms or hallway typically would not be included in that assessment.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. It wasn't affecting the bedrooms or the kitchen.
Can I just answer that?
Yes.
The kitchen in this, where it's been set out at the moment, is more than just a kitchen. It's kind of where they live. Well, it's not all the way upstairs. It's sort of halfway between the ground floor and the first floor. It's just literally halfway there, so suspended, if you like, but very close to, you know, to that sort of area, which I'm sure noise would, you know, if it's permitted, would get up into the area where they practically spend most of the time.
Sorry, it's more of a comment, really. I'm very mindful that the determinants of this committee fall into the 4 areas, as I'm sure we're all aware. But just to add to that, our high streets are changing, and I think we do need to be mindful of that. I'm sure Mr. Johnson has done his homework, and I don't want to disappoint you, but there is a very successful craft ale house in my ward, of which I'm sure you're aware. And I do accept, and I think you made the point well, that the purpose of an ale house and the whole atmosphere and intent potentially does differ quite considerably from a regular pub. People, I mean, to put it in context, I'm pretty much teetotal, and I will go to the ale house with friends because it is a community. So I think in terms of public nuisance and public disorder and potentially noise levels, it's not, all I can say is it from the craft ale house in my ward, that has not been an issue. People tend to go there more for social purposes. So in terms of the objectives that we're looking at and considering the mitigations that have been proposed, bearing in mind that in a conservation area and planning is a separate issue. We're here only to determine the actual granting or not of the license. I'm sort of minded to accept what the applicant is saying, as I have. That's my experience.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, you want to say?
Yeah, two things. To apologise. I have it in my notes, Boojum and Snark. I've been there a couple of times, so you're right. I do apologise. I do like their beer a lot. I know they're working, I think, with Goddard's at the moment to expand. So that's a real good success story. So yeah, I do apologise for that. The second thing is to allude to what Mr. Gard from legal said about planning. The irony about this application, of course, is going all the way through it, and if it gets signed off, Mike will have another chance to object, because I do have to get a change of usage, which is planning, and I have to go all through a full planning application for, in my point of view, an annoyance, which I know we have to go through the legal parameters of planning, but to me, I'm not changing anything. But Mike's right, like I suppose I didn't concur to a listed building and actually attaching soundproofing to the wall. But I assume planning will cover that. So you'll probably find me here again if there's objections regarding the building, because this is just the licensed premises application, and so there's a chance it won't happen. It would be a shame. I think it's been alluded to that I'm new to East Cowes, and probably Mike has a lot more history in East Cowes, hence the reason of his concern, and I do understand that. As Councillor Andre said, I think ale houses bring something positive to an area, not negative.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that would be taken into consideration, and but I've still got another few months to go in trying to get planning, so this still might not happen, but I hope it does.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I can assist, Chair, sorry. I think, unless Mr. Power has any objection, we're at point 10 on the procedure, which relevant authorities have had the opportunity to sum up now. Is that right, Mr. Power? Nothing else to say?
Ben, of Mr. Gard and Chairman, before that, can we just confirm that the objector, Mike, has no further comments to want to raise as an objector, as a summing up process? I thought it was now, but then why?
Yeah, very, very quickly, just to reiterate the strength of that condition that's been offered. It's not something we typically offer. However, in respect of that sound insulation condition, it's an absolute condition, and no licensable activity is to occur prior to its acceptance. Now, that acceptance has to come from environmental health, and the assessment will be undertaken by officers who typically undertake noise impact assessments as part of their daily role.
Well, I've heard various sort of, for me, it's sort of education, I think, to understand how these committees work for a start. I don't first become a councillor myself, but yeah, my history goes way back to the 1960s, actually, in East Cowes. So I do have a very sort of strong connection over the years. I think I've made my points fairly, and I don't think I can add to them. So we'll wait to see where this goes.
Yeah, no, I've nothing to add. I kind of ad hocly summed up just a minute ago, I think, so I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's just to cover a couple of comments really that have been made whilst discussions have been taking place. One particular comment was, is there a need for another licensed premises, a craft ale house, or whatever sort of description you want to give to the premises? Just for information, obviously need isn't a factor that you guys can consider under the Licensing Act. And there is one exception, and that's if there was a cumulative impact policy in place, which limits the amount of licensed premises within an intense area, which obviously isn't the case with this one. So need isn't something that you can consider. Likewise with the activities of smoking, yes, it can be a nuisance. Unfortunately, the Licensing Act doesn't address that. There's other legislation such as the smoke-free legislation, which came in force in 2006. Obviously, relevant responsible authorities such as Environment and Health can get involved and look into those sorts of matters should that become a nuisance to someone following the granting of a license such as this. The application, as I say, needs to be deemed on its own merits rather than need and other factors. In relation to the list of buildings and sort of works or renovations that need to be carried out, installation as such, so Dan from Environment Health has already said, plan and the applicant as well, planning and other authorities will be involved in that process prior to the licensable activities being permitted, as well as an assessment being taken into consideration from environmental health officers. One final point was that the applicant was talking about, and everyone else talking about, the control and management of behaviour of customers. If you like, management or licence holder is responsible for that within the immediate vicinity of the premises. If the customers decide to obviously move off and away from the premises, then they have a responsibility in their own rights to behave themselves, and it can't be linked back to the responsibility of the licence holder as such. So after considering all the information, licensing authorities' views are that the granting of the licence with agreed conditions would not adversely impact upon the licensing objectives. Members should determine the application in accordance with Section 35 of the Licensing Act 2003 and the Licensing Act Hearings Regulations 2005. And just to reiterate, the options open to you today are to grant the proposed application as requested by the applicant, grant the proposed application with agreed conditions and any other conditions that you guys may feel are appropriate and proportionate, or the third option will be to reject the application. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Macmillan, the committee has debated the issue, and we have three options to choose from. One is to grant the license as per the application. The second one is to grant the license as per the application with any modifications to the proposed hours or additional conditions that the subcommittee deem reasonable and proportional to promote the licensing objectives. And of course, the third one is to refuse the whole or part of the application. The committee has decided to go for option 2, to grant the license, but with conditions. And Mr. Guard will reiterate the conditions.
Thank you, Chairman. This is in respect of a licensing subcommittee on Wednesday, the 9th of August 2023, in respect of an application for a premises licence for Island Life Craft Ale House at 1A Clarence Road, East Cowes, Isle of Wight, before Councillors Ian Ward, the Chairman, Councillor Debbie Andre and Councillor Claire Mosdell. Upon receiving the report of the licensing section, oral and written evidence from the applicant, responsible authorities and other persons, and having regard to the guidance issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, and the Isle of Wight Council Statement of Licensing Policy, the subcommittee hereby grants the licence in accordance with the application, subject to those conditions proposed by the applicant within the operating schedule, and also subject to the mandatory conditions specified in the Licensing Act 2003, but modified to such an extent as members have considered appropriate for the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives by requiring the following conditions, namely those conditions agreed between the applicant and Environmental Health on page 47, and also those agreed with the police on page 49 of the report. The reasons for those conditions are: the conditions are attached as per the reasons given within the report in order to promote the licensing objectives, and in particular the prevention of public nuisance and the prevention of crime and disorder, and in accordance with the Isle of Wight Council Statement of Licensing Policy and the section 182 guidance. In reaching the above decision, the subcommittee have had regard to the Human Rights Act 1998, and in particular Article 1 of the First Protocol, Article 8 and Article 6. The subcommittee consider this decision is proportionate and appropriate for the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives under the Licensing Act 2003. There is a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court if anyone is dissatisfied with this decision, and any appeal must be made within 21 days of the date of notification. And that being the committee's decision, Chairman, I'll ask you to sign that. Thank you.